story about the temple, and sweet Peg reading it actually made it even more ominous to me. It was awesome. Thank you for reading it that way. But it's not a pleasant story, is it? The idea that storms would come and that destruction would come. But this story doesn't happen in a vacuum. When Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple, it happens in the wake of another encounter. So Jesus is sitting across from the collection box at the temple. Now, I want you to think like offering plate, okay? So a box on the wall that people put in their offerings. And he's watching as people are putting in their offerings. Now how would he know, how would Jesus know what people put in to the offering box? Is he just guessing? Or perhaps people are being really obvious about their giving. Maybe they're holding up, the big bills or the big coins before they place them in. Or perhaps Jesus isn't only watching the box. Perhaps he's also watching the people that are sitting around him. And as the large gifts go in that people are noticing, people's eyes get big, right? Wow, that was a big gift. But you look at that, and then the widow comes, and the widow puts in just a couple of coins. And you can see on their face, what a pity, she's got nothing more to give. What a small gift, why even bother? Jesus points out to those around him that even though the gifts of the rich people were large, they weren't going to impact them in any significant way. But the small gift of the widow, that was all she had. And so those coins, they were probably her grocery money, and she gave it away. She gave it anyway. And then he hears people talking about how magnificent the temple was. Would you look at this place? Luke says it like this. They were talking about how it was decorated with beautiful stones and ornaments. Well, that explains it, right? It helps us get a picture. Not really. It doesn't give us any idea how magnificent the temple was. Now, on the front of the bulletin, I have a picture. Here it is again. Okay? This picture, it's hard to fathom from this picture just how big the temple is from this perspective. But if you notice the wall in the foreground, that wall is more like a gate and would be about, at least the pillars, it would be at least as tall as me. Now, I understand I'm not that tall, but it still makes it really, really big, this temple. And all that you see of that building, including the stuff in the back, is considered the temple. So it's huge. It's massive. And it took decades to build this place. And it was a marvel of human engineering. Now, here's what they imagine the fixtures, the stones, and the beautiful stones and the ornaments look like on the inside of the temple. All right, and so they don't really know because they don't have pictures of it, but this is a representation of the descriptions that they have. There's like a pulpit there in the center. Can you see that? It's like right here. This is the pulpit compared to everything else. So this place was just massive. Can you imagine how much those curtains cost? Actually went to Hobby Lobby yesterday to look at fabric for curtains just to put like in front of a closet. Those curtains would have been really, really expensive. All right. So the amount of gold in this room, we have nothing to compare to this at all. Sitting in here, we just can't fathom that. Because, this building is great. It's sturdy. It's spacious enough to hold all of us for worship, though actually it isn't quite big enough for everybody. We have to have a second service in order to do this. But I also think that there's a day coming when we won't even have enough space for two services. We'll have to add a third. But still, this building is really big. And as beautiful as I think this place is, it isn't even close to the temple in the picture. Right? It's not anywhere close. Now, the piano is pretty valuable. The organ is pretty valuable. The candlesticks are shiny, but there's not very much brass on there. And it's brass, it's not gold. In the temple, there would be gold. And I love this ceiling. If you look up at this ceiling, it's a classic architecture of the 60s and early 70s. And the wood ceiling is a reminder, it's a representation of Noah's Ark. It looks like the Ark turned upside down. And remember, the Ark is a reminder of God's salvation. So it's just a beautiful place to worship. But it's not the Crystal Cathedral, is it? And it's certainly not any of the mega churches that we might go to when we're on vacation. With the 3,000 seat theater and the coffee shop and the bookstore in the lobby space, right? Now, some people walk through those churches and they're filled with envy. They say things, and I've actually done this before. If only we had this, surely everyone would come to our place. If only we had an espresso machine at the fellowship counter. Might not be so bad, right? If only we had a pastor that wrote books. If only we had a youth center with a climbing wall and a theater and a skate park. Jesus takes one look at all that stuff and thinks about the widow, and he wonders where our priorities are. And so he says, all this stuff that you love, the gold and the curtains and the stones that are bigger than a person, all that stuff is temporary. This temple is temporary. Someday it will be gone. Not one of these stones will be in its original place. So don't put your faith in the building or the gold or the treasure. Put it in something that lasts. Put it in the God that is so much bigger than this place. And there are more important things in the temple. And it's a good thing, because within 40 years of this moment, the temple would be destroyed. There'd be nothing left of it. It happened. Yay, right? I think that's a good lesson for us, because this building is important and we should take care of it. We should do everything that we can to take care of this place, but not for the sake of the building. We need to take care of it so that we have a place to meet and to worship together. But even that isn't an absolute, because in the history of this church, it proves that the building wasn't necessary. The church started out as at a school down the street, right? And every week you would go and you would convert it into a sanctuary every week, and then you'd put it back ready for school for the following week. And you did that every week. It's good to be in a building that provides comfort and belonging, but we could live without it. It isn't more important than the work that God calls us to. And that's actually where Jesus goes right after this prediction. Jesus tells those admiring the temple that the world was going to end someday. Listen to the lovely picture that Jesus paints here. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you will know that its destruction is close at hand. At that time, those in Judea must flee to the mountains, those in the city must escape, and those in the countryside must not enter the city. These are the days of punishment when everything written will find its fulfillment. How terrible it would be at that time for women who are pregnant, or for women who are nursing their children. There will be great agony on earth and angry judgment on this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and will be taken away as captives among all nations. Jerusalem will be plundered by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are concluded. And there will be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars. On the earth there will be dismay among nations in their confusion over the roaring of the sea and the surging waves. The planets and other heavenly bodies will be shaken, causing people to faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world. And then they will see the human one coming on a cloud with great power and great splendor. And now when these things begin to happen, stand up straight and raise your heads, because your redemption is near. This sounds like a good time, doesn't it? But there are people who are praying for this to happen. I've heard this as a way to solve climate change. I've heard people say, don't worry about it. It's not real, right? But even if it is, Jesus will come and make a new earth and we won't have to worry about it anymore. It's all good. And certainly there are people who think that it's a faithful response, and believing that Christ will come again, that is a faithful response. It is a part of faithfulness. But those closest to Jesus also thought that Jesus was going to return within their lifetimes, and we are still waiting. And we could be waiting a long time. So what's the faithful response in the meantime? That seems to be what Jesus is getting at here. I mean, he isn't telling these folks to get a clue just to amuse himself. There's purpose to this teaching, like stop looking at the opulence of the place as a reflection of what God wants, because God doesn't require this. Look at the widow. Look at her small gift. Her small effort to make a difference. Look at the ways in which people are faithful that have nothing to do with enormous gifts. Enormous gifts aren't bad. They just aren't what's required to do God's work. And that's good news for us. Because anyone else think that the world's problems are so enormous? They're just so big that we can't even begin to deal with them? But does that mean that we shouldn't try? I mean, should we just sit on our hands and wait for Jesus to come instead of dealing with hunger or poverty? Or perhaps we can be the widow and we can do what we can. Maybe faithfulness requires that we do the small things that we can do to affect these problems. Maybe we don't use a straw, or maybe we don't use styrofoam. They're kind of simple things, and sometimes we think they're played out, but I think we could reduce our carbon footprint significantly. And we can make another 100 small changes that will add up if we do it together. The widow's gift was a small thing, though it was significant to her. And it was significant to Jesus. And so will our efforts be to end things like hunger and poverty and war. These big things that we can't even imagine that we can have an impact. But why wouldn't we do these things? Is it pride? Are we too important to make a change? Is it something else? Are we too small to feel like we could make a difference? Are we sure that this temple is indestructible? Are we sure that we won't sink the ship? Or does God want us to be sensible in the way that we live together, to do our small part, but to add it together, like the widow, adding her little bit to the treasury as part of our faithfulness? Would you pray with me, please? God, help us to see what your will is for us, what your work is for each of us. Because no matter what we try to do, we're not big enough to do anything in a huge way. But our small part can add to other small parts to do something incredible. And you promised to help us do that. So help us to do our small part in poverty, hunger, war, in climate change, in all these big issues in our world. Help us to make a difference.